Great. Good evening, everyone. I will call to order the Marin Water Board meeting of December 10th, 2024. Now, this is a particularly welcome meeting, not just because we have a lot of good public attendance, which is always appreciated, but because we're welcoming a new colleague to our board. Diana Mayer, it's great to have you here. And our first item of business is a swearing-in ceremony. So Terry, you're going to manage that?
Yes. So, Director Mayer, can you please stand? Okay, and repeat after me. Raise your right hand and then say your name. I state your name.
I, Diana Mayer,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution for the State of California,
and the Constitution for the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon
discharge the duties upon
which I'm about to enter.
which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then we'll move to roll call.
Director Diana Mayer,
Present.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
Director Larry Russell, he's on his way, Vice President Matt Sampson,
Here.
and President Ranjiv Kush.
Here,
Thank you.
do any of the board members have questions or comments regarding today's agenda? If not, do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved.
Second. Great. Any public comments on today's agenda?
There are none.
Okay, then could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Director Mayer,
Aye.
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
and President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
The ayes have it.
Next item is public comments on items that are not on the agenda.
Yes, we do have one. Mr. Phil Sauter, please.
Good evening. Last night I went to a San Geronimo Valley community meeting where we discussed things we'd like to do in the coming year. One of our goals was to become better acquainted with Marin water. As you know, the valley hosts the district's primary water treatment plant and is adjacent to the district's watershed. We also participate in stewardship of the creeks that run through our community, and many of us volunteer to help improve fish habitat. Our broom service group has cleared broom adjacent to the treatment plant and the 2 water tanks along Conifer. We think there's a benefit for both the district and the community to work more closely together and to help one another achieve our goals. 2 specific ideas that drew interest were water conservation and a tour of the water treatment plant. A couple of us at the meeting had toured the treatment plant a dozen years ago and were very impressed by the processes used and by the SCADA system that's used to monitor and control the water distribution process. Everyone at the meeting was interested in seeing what the 2 of us described. The other idea was to hear from staff about conservation programs throughout the district and how we compare with other communities. If there's a chance to learn from others how to do a better job, we want to do so. And if there's something that we've discovered in our community, we'd welcome the chance to share it with others. After our meeting, I started wondering if this kind of closer interaction might be useful in other communities, especially around water conservation. I find that most Marin residents have an interest in conserving water and are also likely to swap ideas about what works and what their neighbors are doing. I've also found, somewhat surprisingly, that many folks are not familiar with the most basic information about their water use, let alone their community's water use. Such community meetings might be a good way to get local discussions going and information passed around. I think the San Geronimo Valley could provide a good test case to see how more communication could result in better outcomes for water conservation, habitat protection and restoration, and other areas where our interests align. A number of us would be happy to help facilitate such a forum. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two more speakers, Larry Minikis and Marilyn Price.
Good evening, board, and Diana, welcome. Official public welcome to you. And I just want to say I regret that I was unable to attend the last meeting where we said goodbye to Monty. I would have really liked to have been there. We had a board meeting, so I had an overlap. I just couldn't do it. I spoke to Monty personally, but I just want you to know the only reason I wasn't here is because I had other things that night, other priorities. And Diana, looking forward to working with you. Thank you all.
Miss Marilyn Price.
Yes, hello, yes. And I just joined. I just heard the last of what Phil had to say, so I'll have to check the beginning. But I just want to tell you a little story. I was attending an environmental meeting that I go to once a month. And one of the people in the meeting, it was a steering committee meeting, very environmental. And I always give a little water report on, what I learned from attending your meetings. And after I discussed it, she just it said to me, well, you know what, because of all the rain, I have, for now, just kind of like given up some of the ways I've been conserving. And I was just like startled. And I just replied to her, well, actually, I've been conserving water since 1970, and I just keep it going year after year. And I'm just thinking of, if I have heard that our water use is going up, and I saw your last message that came out, and I just still wonder, not enough people really know about the need to conserve year in and year out. It's consumption in general, and water for sure is part of that consumption, and the connection of pumping water to our energy, so that people really know, all the reasons behind why we always need to save water, whether we're in a drought or not. And as I say, I was startled to hear this from a very conservative environmentalist who, like, for a moment there was thinking a little bit differently just because we have all the rain. And I just wish more of that message could get out. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for your inputs. We'll move on now to directors and general managers' announcements, and we'll have a separate agenda item focused on board committee reports just after. Any directors' announcements? Jed, I'll start with you.
Nope, thank you.
Matt? Diana?
No, thanks.
None for me either, so we'll be efficient. Move on to Ben, general managers' announcements.
Yeah, just briefly, I think the board is maybe aware that we're recovering from some system issues we've had with emails and calendars. A lot of hard work by our IT staff to address it that's continuing, and a lot of work throughout the organization of figuring out ways, of course, we're so dependent nowadays on technology. But I did want to note that really out of the gate quickly, which I really appreciated, staff found a way to access emails from customers. So we had eyes on what was going on in the system, if there were concerns or issues, water quality specifically. We were very close to migrating, as we've talked to the board, to Microsoft 360, where we wouldn't have had this issue. And as you know, we have that in process in SAP, and basically some hardware. I look at it as an infrastructure renewal need similar to our tanks and pipes that we have to focus on, and that's underway. So a lot of good work, a very difficult week for many folks that I appreciate them stepping up. So just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Ben. It was a good reminder of why our IT upgrades that we're carrying out right now are so important. Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to board committee reports. We have two. I'll start on November 20th. We had our Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting as well as special board meeting. Was that a special board meeting or? I think there were enough of us, right?
Yeah, there were
In any
enough of
case.
you.
I'll give a quick overview of that. Water efficiency staff presented an overview of several items, including the preliminary results of a survey of property owners who had previously applied for the Cash for Grass rebate program to learn more about the applicant's motivations and any potential benefits and challenges of the program. We also heard about grant funding opportunities that could support expansion of the TURF program and discussed current policies regarding the use of district-provided recycled water for turf irrigation. Water efficiency staff also reviewed the committee's with the committee 2 agreements with the California Water Efficiency Partnership to fund flume devices, rainbird irrigation controllers, and Rachio irrigation controllers for the next 2 years. The committee referred the agreements to tonight's meeting to be considered for approval. Communication staff provided a quarterly report out on the performance of the district's digital communications and an update on recent outreach activities that support a number of different district initiatives and programs. The public may access and view the video recording of the November 20 committee meeting from the district's website. And then Jed, on November 21st, we had the Finance and Admin Committee.
Great. Yes, we had the Financial and Administration Committee meeting of Marin Water on November 21st. The staff provided a financial update, including a review of the district's year-end balances, reserves, and quarterly investment report. We're slowly coming back to refurbish our reserves that had been depleted over several years, and we're on the way, but we have a long way to go. So there's good work by everyone to be thoughtful and conservative. We also had a public hearing that was to discuss and approve Ordinance 468, which proposed both an increase in the per diem compensation for board members from $200 to $250, but at the same time reduced the number of days that the board can receive compensation from 10 to 8. And therefore, we have approved no additional increase in the amount of compensation that we can have on an annual basis above $24,000. And yet I haven't seen anyone reach that close yet. So every meeting that attends those, every director that attends those meetings can have that compensation. The ordinance also proposed that the directors may receive compensation on each calendar month, and the board approved that ordinance, and it will take effect next year. The public may access the staff reports and the video recording of the November 21st board meeting on our website, and that is it.
Great. Thanks, Jed.
I do have one more. So on the following day after that, on the 22nd of November, we had our Lagunitas TAC meeting quarterly. And unfortunately, we had to be virtual based on all the storms, but we got to see 2 really interesting presentations, and I'm going to favor one. You'll understand why in a second. But the first effort was the rehabilitation of Roy's Redwoods as an ongoing 1TAM project, and the amount of work and thoughtfulness that went into really concentrating on hydrology through that area and recreating the natural creek, both surface water and then groundwater, was really impressive to see. And I encourage everyone to go out and take a look, because they're almost wrapped up, and the place has been remodeled quite nicely. And it's going to be really interesting because it's one of the focuses was allowing children to be able to explore a little bit within confined areas, still let kids be kids, but also get exposed to nature in a way that it's intended to. So hats off to the folks doing that. And the second one, Marin Water staff stepped up to show off one of our, really our showcase projects and rehabilitation. That's Lagunitas Creek, the phases that have been going on. So our crews did a great job, really well received, and we're getting so much attention, and it's really well deserved for all the hard work going into Lagunitas Creek. So that was Lagunitas TAC.
Quick comment.
Yeah,
Better?
of course.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone was able to go out to Leo Cronin or see the coho coming in this year, but it was astonishing. I mean, there were 2-3 foot beautiful salmon coming in. Super proud of the work that we're done, and I'm hopefully the numbers will show as good as the fish did. So go check them out.
Yeah, it's still underway. So good opportunity. Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jed. Our next item is approval of our consent calendar, which today includes 2 items. First is approval of the minutes from our last board meeting on November 19th. And second is authorization for our general manager to execute agreements with the California Water Efficiency Partnership to extend the Flume and Rachio direct distribution programs for 2 years, and approval of increased turf program rebates utilizing grant funds until exhausted. Terry, do we have any public comments on our consent calendar?
Yes, Mr. Larry Menikis.
No, no, sorry.
But you don't have one now? Okay. All right. I don't have anyone else.
Okay, then
No worries.
do we have a motion to approve our consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Terry.
Director Mayor?
Aye.
Director Smith?
Aye.
Vice President Sampson?
Yes.
And President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Moving on then to our regular agenda, we're going to start with item 9A, which is Board of Directors reorganization for 2024. The board president and vice president serve one-year terms. The current terms, myself as president and Director Matt Sampson as vice president, have come to an end. And it is time for us to elect a new president and vice president. We'll begin with nominations and the election of our new president, who will then preside over the election of our new vice president. Welcome, Larry.
Hello.
So I'll ask, do we have a nomination for the president's position?
I nominate Matt Sampson.
Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Great. Terry, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Mayor?
In favor? Aye.
Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Russell?
No.
Vice President Sampson?
Yes.
And President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Director President Sampson. The gavel is now yours. I think we officially have to switch seats.
We do. And name tags.
And name tags.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Alrighty, so the second part of this agenda item is to fill the role for vice president. So I'd like to take a nomination for vice president, please.
I nominate Director Jed Smith for the vice president's position.
Second.
Terry, roll call.
Director Mayor?
Aye.
Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Russell?
Aye.
President Sampson?
Yes.
Director Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to reflect and allow the fellow board members to make comments for our outgoing president, Ranjiv Kush, during his term. So Jed, before you start moving.
I think we're staying.
Okay, that sounds good. So I'd like to have the opportunity now for any board members who'd like to make comments for Ranjiv.
Yeah, Ranjiv, as I mentioned when we walked into this room, I thought you did an outstanding job this year. I'm super proud to be working by your side. I thought you presided over a lot of very interesting and difficult conversations. You did your homework. You worked hard. You were thoughtful. You worked with the staff super well. I think that the agency and our customers and our county were well served by your leadership, and I'm super proud to be working with you.
Means a lot, Jed. Thank you.
Director Russell.
I'd like to thank you for adjusting your schedule to be at as many meetings as you made. I was very pleased that you were able to do that and willing to do that. You've done a great job.
That's important, Larry. I understand that. Thank you.
Diana, not to put you on the spot, but if you'd like to say anything, you're welcome to. And if not, feel free to pass.
Well, I did watch a lot of meetings on video, Ranjiv, and it was very impressive. Your command of the subject matter, your even-handedness, and you have so much knowledge, just both in talking to you and watching you. That really came across. So thank you for your service.
Appreciated, Diana. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to first start out by saying, Director Russell, congratulations on your victory. And Diana, both congratulations and welcome to the board on yours too. We're very excited to have you join us. So Director Kush, I'd like to acknowledge a lot of stuff that you've done on behalf of all the board over the past 12 months. Your guidance and leadership was critical to what we had to do. And I look back over the past actually 2 years, and you were thrown right into the mix. You know, you didn't get a chance to do just a regular board assignment. You went right to vice president in your first year, and you just stared the challenge right in the face and didn't shy away from it. And it really led to a benefit to your role as president. You know, and I look back at the 12 months again, and I haven't seen anyone prepare as well as you have. You know, your notes for every meeting, your ability to go through and understand the agenda, and having read the packets really show that you are vested in this district and that it means a lot to you, and your decisions were taken, you know, very seriously, which was important. And we've done a lot in the last year. You know, we talked about the Lagunitas Creek a second ago, but that was a big project. And then we worked through a water efficiency roadmap through many iterations from which you had a heavy hand in. You were a big proponent of accelerating a lot of the infrastructure projects we dealt with. I'm not sure if you remember, we dealt with a rec management plan for a little bit and some parts of that, but there are two really big items that you helped drive. And that was one, the 5-year strategic plan, which we kicked off last year, which is going to be critical to our success as we move forward with the planning. And then the second is a constant push for our water supply roadmap. You know, these were all big items, and they took a lot of work to do. So your efforts were appreciated and noted. And it's down here. Wow. Yep. So on behalf of the board, general manager, general counsel, and all the district staff, thank you very much for your service for last year.
It's a big group effort, clearly. You know, it all happens in collaboration with so many colleagues, both on the board and with staff and in the public. So just want everyone to know how much I appreciate the support and the guidance.
Right. Well, you left big shoes to fill. And, you know, as we look over the next 12 months, the quantity of work and the amount of significant decisions that we're going to have to make on this board is not going to wane from this previous year. And my intention is to hopefully build on the foundation that you helped lay for us over the last year, continue making progress to our most pressing issue, and that's our increased water supply. You know, it's going to be critical not to lose sight as we go down this road of the voter mandate delivered in 2022, following a historic drought that exposed our water system's vulnerability. We must not let this fade from memory as we move into this next year. Thinking back on 2022, the district was in a much different place, and it's exciting to see how much progress was made around workforce staff development, fiscal health, and infrastructure and watershed maintenance. But as we get ready for our presentation on the water supply roadmap this evening, I would like to acknowledge that these conversations would have been very different had the prior board not had the courage to raise rates to a level that would allow the district to begin addressing many of these current challenges. This acknowledgement also extends to our ratepayers. Your increased contribution is not taken for granted, and it will be used responsibly and focused on maintaining a healthy water district while increasing our water supply or available water supply. You know, and lastly, nothing happens at this district without the leadership of our general manager, his senior leadership team, our general counsel, and all the men and women who come to work in and day out to ensure a clean, reliable water supply is delivered to our customers' taps. So I think we have our marching orders, I think we have our mandate, and you know, the value of the employees doesn't go unnoticed. And I think with that, it's time to get to work for 2025. And right off the bat, we're going right to a water supply roadmap presentation, item number 10B.
Thank you, President Sampson, and welcome, Director Mayer. Paul Stellier, I'm the Water Resources Director, and I'm joined with Brett Uppendahl, our Finance Director tonight, and Xavier Arias with Woodard and Curran, who's helping us with program management on the water supply roadmap. We do have a short presentation tonight that's focused on sort of costs for the roadmap. And some of it we've shared previously in other presentations, and we'll kind of skip through those a little bit quickly. The costs have been updated to 2024 numbers in terms of capital. And the new item tonight that we're adding to the portfolio of costs is on local storage. So we'll get to that. And I note that we have a fair number of folks in the audience who I'm sure are eager to get to the discussion part of the evening. So with that, let's jump in. Our overview, we are going to touch on just, the short-term projects for the water, the roadmap, and then, as I say, dive into the longer term in terms of cost. So tonight is focused on cost, and just we need to remember that cost is but one criteria at which we look at projects. It's a very important criteria, but it is just one criteria, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as the evening goes on. And we'll wrap up with some next steps as to what President Sampson was talking about and what's the early part of next year is gonna look like. So without further ado, our short-term projects, sort of work in progress is how I'm thinking of these. These are things that are ongoing at the moment and part of the fabric of the water district at this point in terms of what our staff are doing. Water efficiency is ongoing, and we heard reference to the master plan that was recently adopted. That work continues and in the background, and we're constantly searching for new ways to get our customers to join us in using water wisely. The Sulahuli electrification project, that's going to add electricity to the pump station out there, and then we're going to add a pipeline to connect Sulahuli to Nicasio. Some of that flow is currently overland flow, and we'd like to make sure we don't lose any of that water when we do transfer it. That work is kind of in preliminary design. It is right now in a pending status while we think about local storage, because local storage may affect the placement of that a pump station out at Sulahuli. We had a project on Phoenix to Bontempi connection to connect one of our oldest reservoirs to our system. Phoenix had not been connected to our system permanently and required crews to go out and move pipes around to get the water to be used. That project is sort of in preliminary design, but we're holding on to it at the moment because as we were working through that, we came across the Nicasio Spillway project, which has even more water associated with it and seemed like it would be a better use of our resources. So we're moving forward as fast as we can on the Nicasio Spillway modification project. And we've had a number of pretty significant meetings. We've had 2 meetings with the Division of Safety of Dams already. The first, an introductory meeting where we introduced the project and talked to them about their processes. It was very educational for us and for them. And then more recently, where we were talking to their team on the hydrology and hydraulics for the project, where we, talking about their concerns over the stability and seismic studies and things that they're going to be interested in. So that project is moving, and we expect to be coming to the board with an update in early January. And then the stream release automation project is underway. We're currently sort of calibrating the stream gauges and working through that sort of controls process. Right now, Lagunitas Creek is doing pretty well in terms of the controls. And so we're quite pleased with that at the moment. Overall, just in summary, we're looking at somewhere around, 4,000 to 6,000 acre feet of water if all of these projects were to come to fruition. And so that's an exciting prospect for us. To put that in context, we consume about 23,000 acre feet of water per year for drinking purposes. And then on top of that, we have environmental releases of about 11 to 12,000 acre feet. So this is not an insignificant amount of water for us. A longer term.
Also, sorry, a lot of detail in these slides, so I know I'll be interrupting, I think, a little more than usual, but just the connection from Nicasio, from Sulahuli to Nicasio, that's not dependent on a local storage decision, is it?
No, the connection is separate, and we do need to separate that line item from the pump station and the pipeline. They were kind of combined together, thinking about potentially using WRDA funding under one project, but subsequent, I think it would make sense for us going forward to separate those 2 projects. Looking at the longer term roadmap projects, broadly speaking, this is in the Marin-Sonoma partnership area where we're really talking about conveyance of winter water from the Russian River. That is flows in the Russian River that are above in-stream required flows in the wintertime months. So that's between October and May, and conveying that water to a Marin reservoir. In terms of increasing local storage, we looked at a number of different projects. If you recall, I think there were 11 or 12 different projects, including new dams, as well as raising some of our local dams. We ended up with a short list of 3. 2 of them were Sulahuli and Kent, which were raising those dams. And then a new, potentially new reservoir, Upper Nicasio, would be a new dam out there. And then we have also looked at new supply. So desalination and recycled water. And there are many sort of 3 different capacities of desalination plant that we've considered. And then a number of different recycled water projects from IPR, so indirect potable reuse. Direct potable reuse has 2 different characteristics, a raw water augmentation and a treated water augmentation version. And then, of course, our purple pipe projects. So quite a lot going on in recycled water as well. As we seek to sort of step back now and look at these projects and try to assess them, this tonight obviously is about costs. So we're headed towards some sort of a metric that we can look at each of these projects and decide whether one's better than another. And that metric typically has been a unit cost in water agency speak. That's a cost per acre foot. It's a little bit of a flawed number in the sense that a cost per acre foot, you can look at them and, there's a high one and a low one. And you go, well, the low one's good. And that's true, generally speaking, but it doesn't necessarily tell you whether that low cost per unit foot project addresses your need. In other words, it could be a very small water supply project and yet it has decent cost per acre foot. But if it only gives you 50 acre feet and you need 5,000 acre feet, it may not be quite so useful. So our key assumptions are stated on this slide, and we've tried to be clear throughout what our assumptions are. Our planning horizon, and previously we had been using a 25-year planning horizon, but we just found that that didn't work for some of the projects that we were considering. Pipelines today have sort of a minimal expected life of around 100 years. A dam, raising a local dam, a dam would have a life in excess of 200 years. So it's a tricky thing to sort of compare some of these projects. So we felt that a planning horizon of 100 years seemed reasonable. The other aspect being yield. So this is how much water are we talking about from these projects? And that really depends on how often you end up using them. So we needed to make an assumption about how many dry years we were going to experience over that planning horizon. And we've assumed roughly 1 in 3, or 32 years in the 100-year period, we would expect to use a water supply. For example, this year, it's not particularly dry. In fact, it's a very wet year so far for us. We've got more water in the reservoirs than we ever have. Yet if it didn't rain between now and the end of February, I think we'd all be reaching for the lever to turn on a new water supply. So that's sort of how we're thinking about how we might be using these projects over the 100 years. And then we had a lot of detail in the prior analysis about, rates of inflation. And I think the key thing for us is just treat these projects with all the same assumptions. And so we've made a simplifying assumption here about a real interest rate. So then comparing the projects by unit cost, the dollars in the numerator, that's our annual cost of water. So that's all of the amortized capital costs and the annualized operating, maintenance, and replacement costs. So remember, some of the projects have a shorter useful life. Say a desalination plant might have a useful life of between 25 and 30 years. So you're going to need to replace a certain percentage of the facilities associated with that plant over 100 years. The denominator, acre feet, is just the yield, as we talked about. So that's how much water we get out of one of these projects in a dry year, and then the 32 years in the 100 years. And again, just to reiterate, tonight is about cost and allowing us to look at these projects kind of in a simplistic way, just looking at the cost alone. It is but one criteria by which we would assess these projects ultimately.
Well, if you could just clarify on the costing.
Yeah.
The amortization of the capital costs, those are over 100 years or 30 years?
What we're going to show you tonight are amortized over 100 years. So this is an economic analysis for us to compare projects. The last few slides where we get into the financing and what it would take per 100 million, those are going to reflect what you would actually be paying for a project. So Brett will be delivering those, I think, last 3 or 4 slides.
Right.
Okay. And that'll talk about what the actual finance costs would be of these. But this sort of economic analysis over that extended planning horizon allows, to something like a dam or a pipeline project to truly reflect its value compared to a shorter useful life project that has a fairly frequent cyclic replacement and high cost for that replacement.
So Paul, we aren't amortizing the capital over 100 years. We are not doing that, right?
In this
Or
economic,
are we?
in this economic
So
analysis.
we are, I see.
In the economic analysis to compare the projects we are.
Got it.
In the financing
I get it.
slides. Yeah.
And then just on the dry year cost for, we're still paying operating and capital costs in wet years. Are those then lumped into the dry year cost when we're not actually using the water being produced by these
Yes.
projects? So those are just lumped into the dry year costs.
Yes. So you've got desalination plant that you can't turn off. You've got to operate it. It's operating at a nominal 20 or 25% capacity, depending on how it's designed in those off years. You've got to continue to operate it. So those costs are reflective. And when we get to the desalination, you'll see kind of a marked difference, especially exaggerated when you look at the 15 MGD and we look at the operating and capital costs associated for desal there.
Thanks.
Okay, so desalination is up first, and we looked at the three different capacities, 5, 10, and 15, and this is the classic desalination situated. For us, it would be nominally down by the Home Depot area in a district-owned facility called Pelican Way. And we ran a pilot plant near that location for about a year in 2005, 2006. So we feel fairly confident in the level of detail that we have from that pilot plant to feed into the cost analysis. And as I said, the costs have been updated to 2024 numbers. Looking at those costs then, the first line item, dry year output, this is a sort of a slightly discounted capacity from the 5 MGD or the 10 MGD and the 15 MGD, about reflecting that these types of complex facilities are not generally online at full capacity 100% of the time. So these reflect about a 95% online percentage, which is I think a fair assessment. The capital costs, I think you've seen before, these are just slightly increased over prior numbers. And what we were just talking about, this fourth line, the total annual cost, capital and O&M, you can see those are fairly significant numbers. And if we look at the 15 MGD and reflect that that's $51.4 million every year to operate that plant, and then think about that in terms of what our entire operating and capital budget is at the district, that number would be about a 46% increase over the existing capital and operating budget for the district. So it is, at 15 MGD, it is a very costly project for us, both in terms of capital and operating. So then,
And it's, sorry, Paul, for the acre foot costs for dry years, can you put that number in context for us? How much are we paying currently for Sonoma water or water from our reservoirs?
yeah. When we looked at the average cost of water, so factoring in the sort of weighted amount of water from Bontempi, San Geronimo, and from Sonoma, it's about $850 or somewhere in that region per acre foot. Purchasing water from Sonoma, which is currently our most expensive water source, is $1,600 to $1,700 an acre foot at this point in time. Does that help?
It's pretty striking. Yeah, thank you.
So again, though, these are, we pay that unit cost from Sonoma sort of regardless. These numbers are reflecting that you're only using this 32 years out of the 100. They would be somewhat lower, though still not anywhere near the 1,700 if we, allowed ourselves to use the desal water all the time and gave the project sort of credit for that water. These numbers might come down to, $5,000 an acre foot.
What did you consider to be a drought to arrive at the 32? Because that's a higher frequency than we have discussed previously.
Yeah, so it was really, as I was trying to give the example at the beginning for this year, it's not a drought by any stretch, and it wouldn't even be a drought if we made it to February, we would just be feeling a little unsure. Yet we would reach for very likely by mid to end of February, rainfall had been below average, we might be reaching for that on switch. And then could be quite a while until we were turning that facility off again. So that's how we arrived kind of at the 32.
So if we had no rain between now and April 1st,
Yeah,
would we hit the 40,000?
no,
So we won't trigger.
we wanted a trigger, but we have different triggers than the 40,000 now, but yeah.
So getting back to my direct question, what number did we choose what's the rainfall that establishes
for-
drought for the 32 years? Or however you approached it?
It wasn't so much about establishing a rainfall or an amount of runoff or even a lake level for this analysis. It was just reflecting that dry years seem to sort of show up about once every 3 years, something like that. Not necessarily a drought year, because you can always get that rainfall, in late March or early April that sort of is the drought buster, if you like, or sort of saves you. So those miracle March type rainfalls, but you would be, if it was dry from now until February, we'd likely be reaching for the on switch for whatever supplemental supply that we had.
But this does lower the incremental cost by having more events. It reduces the hit for how you use it or what the cost of using it is.
A little bit, yeah. It's
A little bit,
a fairly conservative estimate in terms of use.
I'll just one clarification though. You had said earlier on the desal and recycling, we can't just turn them on and off, right? Once they're running, they're running.
Yeah.
So we're essentially spilling that water until we
Yes,
need it in one of those drier
those
winters.
those in particular, those options that have treatment plants, membrane treatment plants in particular, like desalination and the DPR and IPR versions, those would need to run continuously, though at some reduced rate in a sort of wet year. Okay, and then recycled water costs are sort of the first 3 projects that we're looking at here. These are your classic purple pipe projects, so they're irrigation projects or toilet flushing in the case of San Quentin. And you can see that just generally, if you look at the cost per dry year acre foot numbers, the Peacock Gap project, which is largely a pipeline project, so it's going to have a long useful life. We have enough treatment capacity already, so there's no treatment plant associated with it. It's just the pipeline. Even at $28 million, it has a reasonable, by comparative numbers, right, unit cost there. And then as we look at the DPR and IPR costs, you can see the capital line as the complexity for those facilities goes up. So the capital cost, goes from 155 for DPR all the way up to 483 for IPR. And a large part of that is because those projects, the larger volume projects, the last 2 columns, those are higher volume treatment plants. So you've got more facilities associated with the treatment plant. But also we've got to bring that wastewater to a central location. So there's a lot of miles of pipe and pump stations associated with these projects as well. Conveyance, and we've talked about conveyance with the board. I think in April, we brought the sort of selection down to 3, and the 3, if you remember, sort of selected themselves because they essentially had all of the other variants included in the 3. So they were sort of named Cotati, which is essentially bringing a pipe down, pump stations down sort of the backcountry roads down to Sulahuili or Nicasio. The Petaluma 3 project, which is coming from sort of San Marin Drive through Novato out to Nicasio or Sulahuili, and the Petaluma 4, which is going San Antonio Road back to Sulahuili. So fairly similar options, and the team has sort of refined those now. If you recall the last presentation, we'd driven different routes looking for ways to save on paving costs by placing the pipe in the shoulder of the road. So we've really tried to squeeze the numbers on these. And the team is now sort of reviewing the alternatives in the light of criteria so we can be prepared for a recommendation for you in terms of which of these 3 is the superior project from the team's perspective. The cost that we'll show tonight, we've made allowances for environmental mitigations. There are some easements we're going to need to get for construction purposes. And then, of course, we're including the construction costs as well.
Oh, what does the order of magnitude mean on construction costs?
So I think these are class 5.
They are.
Yeah, so that's if memory serves, is that a plus
Well,
50 minus 40 or something like that?
I think their estimate is something like minus 15 to plus 40, something like that. So
Percentage.
yes.
So we'll take the minus, right? Yeah. So, okay, so slightly different capacities here, about 4,000 acre feet for PETA 3, PETA 4 is closer to 5, and then the Cotati project, because there's no existing infrastructure, we could size that however we wanted to. And it's shown here, I think, at a 30 million gallons a day. As we look at these projects and just reflecting, and we'll get to a point in the presentation, I promise, where we can see all of these side by side, because looking at them individually, and then you just think, well, what was desal? Well, the desal numbers were, 14, 15, 16,000 an acre foot. So these are quite favorable in comparison.
Why are the O&M costs high
What did I
for
do?
conveyance?
I'm sorry, Director Kush, could you?
The O&M costs per year seem high to me, up to 6.6 million for the Cotati 3 option.
It is reflecting the purchase of Sonoma water. So you've got to purchase this water as well, and it gets stored into a reservoir, and then
Okay, so that's factored into.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So adding to our tale of costs, now we're at local storage. So these are some new numbers for the board. We did about a month after we came to the board regarding conveyance, we showed up in April of that 2024 and discussed again the selection process. And again, the remaining alternatives sort of selected themselves. If you remember, just as an example, Alpine Dam, when we looked at raising that, the costs were over $1 billion. So there's some really significant costs that were attributed to some of these other projects, and a lot of them ended up screening themselves out either on cost or just viability. So we were left essentially with the 3 alternatives that we've looked at, and these represent a 20,000 acre foot increase, which is about a 25% would be a 25% increase over our existing storage. Right now, the team has been looking at the constructability issues of these projects and the environmental challenges. The costs that we've come and put together do include an allowance for both engineering and environmental mitigation, land acquisition, and again, range of magnitude construction costs. And that's the best information that we have at this point to provide you with. So looking at these, and we've thrown in here Nicasio Spillway. So in terms of a dry year output, you'd take that 3,000 acre feet nominal number for Nicasio Spillway, and you'd divide it by 4, because we're thinking about a 4-year drought. So it would have a nominal dry year output of about 750 acre feet. And then the dam raises would be about 5,000 acre feet per year. Capital cost range on the spillway from 5 million all the way up on Upper Nicasio to 687. We would, at this stage, we should really be rounding these and getting rid of the decimals. So, 690, 520, and 485, something like that, right? And then in terms of operating, this is really where storage kind of will separate itself from some of the other projects. There really is not much incremental operating cost for a storage project. There probably isn't even any staff that we need to hire. We already have, in the case of 2 of the reservoirs, we already have those reservoirs there. We'd just be adding water to them. And you can see for the spillway project in particular, and we've sort of gamed this project a little bit. What if the costs on the spillway project suddenly doubled for us. This is a really difficult project from a water supply perspective to make unattractive from a cost perspective. So even if the cost doubled on this project, this would still be sort of ranked as a very, very favorable project on a cost per dry year acre foot basis. I don't think there's much more to say about these, but there are more detailed slides sort of and the additional slides if you want to look at some of the other pieces of information there. But I think this is the pertinent information for local storage.
Paul, can I ask a quick question on this? You mentioned the once every 3 dry year number ratio we're using at the beginning of this, and then you mentioned and then the Cospio spillway once every 4 years. Is there a reason why there's a difference there?
I'd be glad to talk about it.
Yep.
Sure. I think that there are two different numbers. One is the call it 8 and 25 year or 1 and 3 approximately. That's how often are you operating on a drought footing? Remember, some of the time it'll turn out, oh, it rains anyway, but you still went to that drought footing. Sometimes it's a real drought, but then it rains the next year. And so you have 1 year. This is an assumption about once you are operating a storage project, how do you operate it? And you don't know how long the drought's going to be. So the assumption right now is since you haven't seen droughts that are worse than 4 years, a reasonable rule of thumb is you would say, let's just use 1/4 of that storage that we installed in year 1. If it's still dry next year, we'll use that the next increment. So it's more of it's a simplified operating assumption rather than an assumption about how often droughts occur.
Great. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Are you sure that's what you do? Because it's cheaper to use that water than it is to buy water from Sonoma. So I don't know. That's an interesting philosophical question, is what's the best management strategy? It's a management strategy, but I'm not sure it's the best one from a big picture standpoint.
Yeah, it may not be what we'd actually do, but in comparison for projects, this is it effectively it's the same. You'd be using 3,000 acre feet in 1 year, and then you'd be just dividing those costs over 4. Or we could divide the water up. It's just a little bit of a spreadsheet analysis.
It's really a way, I think, to differentiate for comparison purposes, storage from, say, desal, right? Because in storage, if you're coming into a drought, that's the water you have. And you could use it all 1 year or through 4 years, but you need to distinguish that from a facility that would continually produce water through the drought. So you got to kind of divide that storage volume up through the drought. We pick 4 years because that's our kind of planning, a 4-year drought.
I've also been thinking, Ben, whether it's fair not to have the cost of treatment in there. That this water that's stored, you're not done with it. When you buy the water from Sonoma, you're done with it.
Yeah, no, we do add.
It isn't.
It
Okay.
it is built into
Okay.
the cost. Yeah.
Wasn't clear from your previous slides. I was thinking about that while they were showing.
Yeah, I should have mentioned the O&M on that one. But yeah, there is obviously a cost for treatment. I don't know if you guys are table people or chart people, but we've got both for you this evening. This is sort of all of the roadmap presented in a nice color-coded format, and it's sort of sorted. A little bit of a cheat if we look at the projects that seem to kind of separate themselves on a unit cost basis are those last 6 or 7 projects, aren't they? If we look on the right-hand side down in these last few rows here, you can just see and maybe the other exception would be the Peacock Gap project, but by and large, it's that sort of last 7 rows, I guess. And so if we take that and look at, there's no new information there. It's the same information we've been looking at this evening. If we were to take that chart and sort of, how do we pare it down and think about it, right? We're looking for water supply. And so what projects on here are more than 2,000 acre feet? And so that's all we've done is apply to a filter on this just, and it takes out water efficiency. That doesn't mean we're not doing water efficiency, just to be 100% clear, that remains our number one focus. And we're going to continue doing that. This is just in terms of what water supply decisions that the board will be faced with. We think this represents a fair look at what those options
And
are.
I just encourage you to keep water efficiency right at the top every time. It's so important. It's right in front of us. It's the easiest thing we can do with marketing, communications, and our investment in AMI, which is shown in other districts to save 5%. Just keep it up there. It's really important that we are all over that and don't diminish the importance.
We 100% agree, and we'll do our best to do that. And in our first table, it is number one item up there, including AMI. So it's all in there. This is just reflecting that we're doing that. And there's a commitment from the board and staff to continue with that. Absolutely. So as we sort of look at what decisions may be coming our way, what new decisions are coming our way in the early year, I think this table starts to narrow down what our choices will be. And
Paul, I know you're trying to simplify for us, but it feels like having the capital requirements in to understand the financing lift would also be useful. You know, this type of overview.
yeah, I agree. I'm sorry, Director Smith, did you?
You've already shown that. You can just go back to the previous slides if you want to see it again.
So the same info, so yes, agreed. So these slides focus on the operational or annual costs to the district, right? So these include operation and capital. So this is what we in terms of an economic analysis, not the financial analysis, the economic analysis, the comparative analysis. These are sort of helpful for us. And then looking at that information in chart format, again, it's the same information, but we can see, just right in terms of desalination, what the cost average dry year yield, 10,072, and then comparing that to, the Petaluma 3 or Cotati 3 projects. You can kind of see fairly readily which projects are doing well.
And these are about 3 times or more the current cost per acre foot.
Yes.
So give or take.
Something like that. And when we add in capacity, this is sort of what it starts to look like. And you can see, yes, desalination, there's tremendous capacity built into desalination at 15 MGD. And then you can see in terms of the Cotati 3 project where, and even direct potable and indirect potable reuse have fairly decent capacities as well. Okay, so those are the costs for us, and I'm going to transition over from sort of an economic analysis that helped us sort of compare and look at the projects.
Paul, before we switch to the financing, just on the last slide, when we're looking at yields across all of the different options, the strategic water supply assessment, and the modeling that was done to determine what we would likely need to get through a 4-year drought gave us actually a number. Can you remind us of what that was?
Yes. The number I think that came out of the strategic water supply assessment was around the order of 8,000 acre feet per year.
Per year.
Yeah, per year. And that was at the conclusion of that analysis. As we know, we've gone through a few changes in terms of demand and rebound. And I think we need to take a look at where our demands are, where we think our projections are going to be in terms of demand, to sort of reassess what that impact of demand has been on the strategic water supply assessment. Because at the outset of that strategic water supply assessment, we started with 2020 demands. In 2020, it was quite a high demand year for us. And then we went straight into the drought right after that. And everybody was expecting a drought rebound. I mean, that always happens, right? And we're seeing elements of that, but it hasn't come back the way that it has in the past. So where is our true demand is sort of, and again, all of these plans that we'll be talking about need to be adaptive, right? So we've got to embrace adaptive management. So we want to constantly be looking at what do we need in terms of water supply and then adapting as we go forward.
does the lack of the rebound change your thinking at all in terms of the Jacobs report?
I think it will change some of the modeling that we do in terms of how some of these options might perform for us. So yes, in a way, right? The Jacobs report assumed a demand of almost 27,000 acre feet per year, and our demand today is 23. So if we're looking for 8,000 acre feet, have we found 4? And
Well,
do we need 4?
Remind folks too, that when I joined the board in 2004, it was 35,000.
Right.
So, now I don't know if it's efficiency that's done it or changes or what's changed it, but it's changed.
That's a fact.
And we are coming out of 2 incredibly wet years too,
Yes.
that have an impact on
So-
that for as well.
Cautious and but watchful in terms of what our metrics are and what we're looking for. So anyway, I think it's promising what we've found so far. And tonight again, we've done sort of this economic comparison, and it does look so far that in terms of that economic comparison, the conveyance of winter water projects look more promising from a cost criteria perspective. And again, cost is but one of the criteria that we need to be looking at.
Paul, is there any consideration given to the carbon emissions and comparing these different projects?
So in terms of some of the other criteria that we'll be looking at, that certainly, from a social perspective, could be included there. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Brett. You want to switch seats? Are you okay there, Brett?
I have a question, Diana. Are you talking about the operations or the construction?
I guess both, and comparing the different projects. I'm going to assume that conveyance is going to be a lot less than desal and recycling, but I guess it depends on what kind of energy you're using and a lot of other things. So
Yeah.
And the CEQA process requires us to sort of look at that aspect of projects. Okay.
Good evening, board members. My name is Brett Uppendahl, excuse me, Finance Director. As Paul has indicated over the last couple slides, excuse me, many of these analyses are intended to kind of simplify the analysis, simplify the comparison. We used that phrase apples to apples many times because of the fact that they are such different inputs and such different sensitivities in the sense of lifespans, replacement rates, a mix of operating and capital. And so I think, over the last couple months, as we've been working through these, we've really refined this type of analysis to be, as Paul said, the economic analysis, and really just kind of simplifying some of those other assumptions. As we get into the fiscal policy or the fiscal analysis, it starts to become, not only just what is the best unit cost and what gets us the best yield, but what can we afford and what can we get done. And so I'm going to go through a couple of slides here that I went through with the board, I believe back in April, and kind of re-summarize those in terms of where our district's at and what we can afford in the short term here and what we'd have to be looking for over the long term to be able to fund some of these capital costs. So first slide here is just a refresher on our fiscal policies in terms of how we handle debt, because as you noticed, many of those capital costs would definitely require us to incur debt in order to move forward on these projects. So we've maintained a pretty sound debt policy over the years. The highlights are we limit our total debt outstanding to 4 times our annual operating budget. And then the second kind of main piece we have there is, can we make our payments each year? And we help look at that ratio by our debt service coverage. And that's basically saying what's left over in our operating income divided by our debt service payment. So after we've paid for all of our capital projects, we have our operating budget. Do we have enough money to pay for our debt service that year? So minimum debt service coverage ratio is 150% by policy. All of our existing bond issues require 125%. So our policy is a little stricter than we are required to by our existing covenants, but they're still good targets to maintain over the long term and in terms of financial planning to make sure we can continue to afford the debt service on these investments over 30 years. As obviously things will go up and down with finances and with climate and with drought. And so we want to make sure we can always make our payments there. I think another piece of it that we speak about in our policies is just making sure when we, encounter these debt kind of issuance discussions that we're keeping in mind the intergenerational balance. So either, cash funding may be more appropriate in certain cases, phasing it may be more appropriate, or financing may be more appropriate depending on the particular project, the lifespan of the project, and the benefits that will be due to the community. And so there's no real guidance there other than we should take that into consideration of, are we burdening future generations with too much debt, or requiring our current, a customer base to pay for things that will be essentially rewards for generations to come. And finally, credit quality. So not only do we want to hold ourselves to many of these policies so we can make our commitments here within the district, but when we look outside, we are also evaluated by credit ratings agencies, and they look at these each year. In fact, we are undergoing a review right now of our current credit ratings. And so, that affects the cost of borrowing, right? To have good credit ratings, it keeps the cost lower. And you want to be able to maintain future issuances if you need it. So you have to maintain a good reputation within the financing community. So those are kind of the big 4 or 5 guardrails that we like to look at within our fiscal policies in terms of how we handle debt. Go to the next slide, Paul.
Are you going to fill in some numbers here? Like 4 times the annual operating budget? Which budget? The average? The last one?
A lot of those are really kind of guidelines. And so the budget is the budget, right? And so as you go forward, you want to show that you have the budget there to maintain that, right?
So you're talking about operating or capital included?
Operating
total
budget, operating budget.
Just the operating?
Yep, just the operating budget. Yep. And so our existing debt profile, what we have currently on the books, we have 3 different issuances, one from 2016, one from 2017, and one from 2022. And I would remind the board that many of these are refinancing and kind of taking advantage of better rates. And so we didn't go for new debt in 2022. That was a refinancing to take advantage of the super low rates. But anyway, you can kind of see them here on the overall chart. So by definition, we're paying down principal and interest each year. So the balance will go down, incrementally each year by a couple $1 million. And you start to take a long-term look at this, and when you add that kind of 4 times our operating budget, that's the top line there. What we currently have outstanding are the bottom bars. And so it's just roughly, and I think to your point, Director Russell, we don't know exactly what our budget's going to be in 4 years, but if you add kind of a 3-4% inflator over the years, we think we'll have about the room within our current policies for 350 to 400 million more in debt issuance, in a couple of years.
So stated a different way, we can't afford any of the projects.
We can't afford it under our current policies
Not the
and our
bigger
current
ones,
budget
some of
structure.
the smaller
So
ones.
there
The
are
little
things we
ones,
can,
yes,
yeah.
the big ones.
And there are things we can do to change this over time. This is part of the financial planning over the long term. So under a current budget structure and our current policies, that is the cap, but things can change.
Sure.
But most of these big water infrastructure projects usually include some component or state of federal financing. The Los Vaqueros Reservoir is an example that didn't go forward and actually, I think, freed up a lot of money from the State Water Commission. So will you talk a little bit about how we're going to be approaching that piece of the financing requirement?
Well, so my understanding, not my understanding, but I know the good district's goal is to always maximize all of our grant and federal funding partnerships as well as our regional funding partnerships. So far, it's been very difficult to find funding sources that match our projects. And many times once you get into the federal funding streams, they have additional requirements that are very difficult. So we've been looking to align certain phases of projects that match well with funding. And each year when the funding kind of options come out, we try to align phases and or portions of them that can be funded. But it is difficult at this point just to bake that in and say, we think we're going to get that going forward. What I didn't mention, I think in my last response in terms of, how we're going to financially plan for this is some of these projects have phases to them, natural phases, where you may not have to go out for the entire amount right away. You may be able to cash fund the first couple portions of it and things like that. So you don't always have to do the entire, debt issuance in 1 year for the whole project. So there may be ways to kind of think about how those are done over time.
I have very limited understanding of the Los Vaqueros project, but what I believe is something similar was done, and the state contribution to that was over $400 million, right? Now, it didn't go through. That money may be going to the Sites Reservoir. I don't know, but I think that's not an uncommon strategy. right?
I think how I'm thinking about grant funding is we're going to pursue it. We're going to pursue it actively and aggressively, but we can't count on it. So tonight we aren't assuming grant funding as we just look at what we can afford and how we'd finance it. So this is a very conservative look. Director Russell, your comment, I read into this slide that we have available debt capacity. So I didn't understand the affordability.
Oh, what I was saying is that if you looked at the, 2 slides back, the bottom line was there was a 650 million and a 900 and something million.
Oh, I see. So compared to the 400 million.
Yeah.
Got it.
Next slide.
And so these are just quick ratios, again, determined to kind of intended to help us kind of think through these as we go forward, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of nuance in these projects and the mix of capital and operating. It's not just one bottom line number. There's also a lot of sensitivities over time. I mean, it's one thing to say, we know we can go out for a bond now at a certain rate, but to try to, predict what the bond market will be in 30 years to replace a desalination facility, or what the price of steel will be in 50 years, that kind of stuff is very difficult to predict. So generally speaking, I wanted to provide the board with just some nice ratios for thinking about this as we go forward, that we can scale up or scale down, and to remind the board of kind of where our current rate structure leaves us in terms of our ability to take on more financing. So currently, borrowing costs are around 4.5%. They've stayed pretty level for the last year or two. Longer term trends are a little bit lower, closer to that 3.5% mark. So we would obviously like to wait till those times return until we go back out to the bond market. But nonetheless, 4.5% is what we have now. Under that 4.5% rate, for every $100 million in financing we do go out for, our annual debt service payments will be $6.1 million annually for 30-year financing at the 4% interest rate, or 4.5% interest rate. When we look out to 2027, kind of just picking a mark in the sand at the end of our rate cycle, that our revenue base will be approximately $180 million. And so if you start trying to translate, what an additional, $100 million in debt proceeds would do, what that basically does is it says it's going to be about 3.5% in terms of a rate impact for every 100 million we go out for in terms of net new proceeds. So just another way back of the napkin to think about what that impact would be and how we'd want to phase into that for long-term planning. I put that second bullet in there is that we also would have other reasons why we need to raise rates to keep pace with inflation, and we have other needs in the district. So this would be in addition to any other identified needs that the district has as we go forward. So as an example, again, just to put a number out there, $350 million in debt proceeds. If you just took that straight up, it would be $21.5 million in debt service payments. However, we do have an existing budget within our rate structure. We do have some flexibility as we funded a good portion of this in the last 2 years, specifically in the sense that we have what's called our water supply roadmap budget, which is what we've been using for some of these design studies and initial low-hanging fruit projects. That's around $9 million per year. We also have a $2.5 million contribution to reserves for water supply projects that we could redirect if needed. So the way that I looked at, if we want to use that flexibility, we'd have about $11.5 million per year now that we could convert into debt service if we needed to. So for that $350 million kind of general target there, that would require a net new debt service, or net new kind of funding for debt service of 10 million, which would be right around between 5.5% and 6%. I have 5.75 there now, it's rounded. So if we were to take on another $350 million project at this time, we would have to consider rates in about that range of a 5.75% impact.
So another way I look at this, that in the current rate structure that the board adopted, we can fund ballpark a $200 million project. So above that is where we go out for debt funding, likely.
So that's the end of my slides here. Again, I was just trying to kind of put a little bit of context around that. What does that mean when we talk about this scale of numbers, and what does that put us in terms of our financial planning as we enter the next budget cycle, as we start thinking about the next rate cycle and these longer term projects. And I'll turn it back over here to Paul to wrap up the overall discussion.
Thanks, Brett. So moving forward, we expect future board discussion bringing in the other project criteria, some of which we touched on this evening. For example, the social and environmental stewardship. How do these projects actually perform in drought? What are some of the project risks? I mean, so we need to be thinking about some of those things as well. So our meetings in January and February of next year, 2020, it's already December 10th. I can't believe it. Anyway, we'll be reviewing that criteria to help the board sort of support the decision-making process. And that decision-making process will sort of look like a selection of a preferred project that we want to move into design and CEQA.
Great.
Yeah, so as we're thinking what the next couple months look like, it really will be this slide, moving into decision-making over successive meetings, working with the board and hearing. Maybe we'll be able to start narrowing the set of projects and really just having conversations and discussions about the other qualitative criteria and kind of move towards that decision making. So we'll strive to bring a thoughtful process over maybe 3-4 meetings. We'll see how it goes to move towards that decision. Hopefully wrapping it up by end of February is our goal.
Great. And that's a good goal to keep to try to maintain. Thank you. Paul, thank you. Brett, thank you. Zon, thank you. Further board member comments. Director Russell, start with you.
Cool.
Thank you for the analysis. Super appreciate it. It's been a lot of work over many months and many years. So I appreciate your consultation and expertise in helping us. I think it's time for us to hone in and focus our energy. I don't think we take anything off the table. We have to keep looking at everything over time and over the years and decades as we confront the impact of climate change. But there's some clear opportunities that you're showing us that I think we can put on the side for now. There's no doubt that the desalination options, the Suluhuli expansion, the Nicasio, Upper Nicasio Dam expansion, the Kent expansion are beyond our budget capabilities. They don't seem to make sense. The numbers keep going in the wrong direction, and I think they'll continue to go in the wrong direction. So I'd encourage us to shelf as much energy as we possibly can on those projects. And go full steam ahead on our Nicasio spillway increase, the water efficiency efforts that we have identified, and others that will get us in that 5,000 or 6,000 acre feet in a very short period of time that seem very cost effective. And I'm super hopeful that the conveyance options that you've identified will be fruitful for us. That's within our several $100 million budget capabilities. The least environmental impact, the least impact on landowners in our area, and our growing strength in our relationships with Sonoma, I think can only better a regional impact and how we can help our neighbors. And so I would hone in on those and start to set aside some of these other ones that are clearly out of our reach.
Yeah, thanks. My thanks as well, Paul, Zav, Brett. The numbers are intimidating to say the least. And I was trying to put that in perspective, think about what could I use as a comparator. And so I was looking, one example I think that for me is quite, relevant is the Tamalpais High School Union District has been putting forward bond measures for approvals, for people, for the schools. And I live within that district. So in March of 2024, they put forward a bond measure of 500. I think it's about $517 million, and it actually received a small majority of the voters. Not enough. It takes a 2/3 majority in order to approve a bond measure, but it received about a majority of the vote. So they came back in November and put another bond measure on, I think it's about $289 million, which passed. So that's been thankfully approved. I think those were important infrastructure projects to move forward, and those will obviously be paid for by property tax assessments on all of us that live within that district. Now that's a smaller, that high school district is smaller than Marin Municipal Water District. So fewer people are taking on that level of debt in order to ensure good public infrastructure. So I think what we're looking at here is not really out of alignment of what others are spending in Marin County on what I think most of us feel are really important for our county and the future of our county. So it's just helpful for me to sort of put these things in perspective. Yeah, thanks a lot again.
Great. I'll go back to Director Smith for a comment.
Yeah, I was remiss. I also think, given your numbers and the opportunities with some of the recycling options that you showed us, in particular, Peacock looked feasible in terms of size and dollars and impact. And there is a lot of grant money available for that. Recycling, in some ways similar to desal, has tremendous opportunities to be obviously drought resistant, right? There's you don't need rain to fill the reservoirs. to fill recycling options. So I think you can partner with other folks for that. You can get grant money for that. And I'd suggest that you kind of reach out to other partners to see if they'd be help fund it, and that could come into your range. So I'd add that to my list.
Director Mayor.
Yeah, sobering numbers, especially having just come off of campaigning and everyone wanting to know when their rates were going to be reduced. And the answer was basically never. Trying to come up with other ideas on maybe subsidizing their expenses. But I'm assuming that, and it does look like right now conveyance is maybe the least bad of the options. I'm assuming that if we went forward with something like conveyance, that would not interfere with our ability to make progress on another storage option, say like a reservoir down the road. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. In fact, there may be some synergy between conveyance and storage.
Except for burning up our bonding capacity. So, and one thing, Ranjiv, keep in mind that your observation is interesting, but it's a cumulative impact. Like that group is taking on that debt, but then we're asking them to take on this debt too. So it's a little more complicated than just saying they're able to do it. They're able to do it because in part, we haven't done this kind of thing. So it's a little tricky.
I don't have anything else. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Again, thank you for the presentation, and the momentum to keep this process moving forward is important too. A clarification on the debt capacity piece. With our normal operating budget right now, we have a roughly 200 million if we stretch it. Is that safe to say?
Are you saying within our current budget, how much we could afford without going to debt? Is that what your
Correct.
question is? Yeah, that's what General Manager Hornstein was
Okay.
saying. Yeah.
And so that would be in addition to the graph you showed with 350 to 400 million on there.
Well, so what that would do is we would take our existing debt issuance of about 140 and add, 200 to it. So we'd be at a cumulative of about, 350, 360 right around then. And then we'd have only a little bit left towards the top, towards the capacity. So it would get us close to our current policy, or close to our current cap.
Okay, great. No, thank you for that clarification. And I agree with the comments being said tonight. I mean, these numbers it's really, sobering was I think a very appropriate word when we start looking at all this stuff. But to follow up on Director Kush, I mean, I look back and look back and look back, and I don't know how many people get excited for a really inexpensive, cheap infrastructure project that benefits the greater good for a community. I mean, you can go all the way back to the Golden Gate Bridge and how much protesting there was over the cost of that. And we're still living the SMART train protest too, but I think we're getting to the point now, if you remove the SMART train, there'd be more folks with upset than there are right now paying for it. So we're going to have to get over an uncomfortable hump, but the actual North Star here is the fact that we're not going to be in a position like we were in 2021. And I think as we go down this road, we see these numbers, but what I would like to see in a separate column is best estimate of what it would cost to throw another pipeline across the bridge or have to truck water in, should we be in the same situation without increased capacity. Now, I think that threat goes down, or that risk goes down as we get an Nicasio spillway gate, or we get some other stuff online. But I don't know what plan B is right now. And my guess is plan B is going to be incredibly expensive. And so do we solve the problem with plan A, or do we wait for plan B to have to kick in? And I'd like to see those comparisons as we move forward with that. So, and that's all, but thank you very much for the presentation.
I think that's an excellent comment. Keep in mind too, that we don't control the weather. So everybody's talking here like time is not of the essence. Just, it takes what it takes. The problem is if it's not, then what do you do? And I think your comment about the pipeline across the bridge is a very interesting one, because the numbers are substantially lower than these numbers. So,
I want to encourage this board to be a lot more direct. We need to guide this staff to make some decisions. I see us in an emergency right now. We need to start taking things off the table, and we need to focus our efforts and increase our water supply as soon as possible. So let's give them some guidance, what we might want to take off, and let's get moving as fast as we possibly can.
Yeah, yeah, Jed, yeah, appreciate that. But I do want to know if there are other factors other than cost that we have not yet touched on. I think some of the things that, Paul, you're saying you're going to be bringing to us that may, just to make sure we have no surprises. Conveyance does stand out as something that's affordable, that's addresses a lot of the other issues that are important for us, such as regional collaboration. I just want to make sure there's no surprises related to that.
I do agree that we need to narrow the options. My thought is the next meeting will be designed to do that, as we'll take an initial cut through all the other criteria. And, staff will likely bring some suggestions for the board to consider on ways to narrow down the selections. And it may very well be kind of self-evident in this, what we bring. And that'll narrow, and then we'll talk about, you will likely or perhaps want additional information on certain projects. We just got the comment tonight that we'll need to think about how do we compare that in a way to the null option. We haven't really done that, and we'll bring that as well. So we're getting actually a lot of very good feedback and information on designing and setting up the next steps for the board decision-making.
Great. Thank you, Ben. I think, moving on a preferred alternative is going to be a priority. Any further board comment? Okay.
I have one more. I think Jed's comments are very interesting in the sense of, are there things that we could push forward without keeping them on the list? In other words, just green light certain of the projects. I think it's very interesting, attractive that Peacock Gap has come back up into the loop. Now, I don't know what the status is. The owners of Peacock Gap offered us $5 million to move forward. I don't know where they stand. I know their business model is not so as good as it was when they made that offer. But I think and I think the Meadow Club one needs to be at least in the horizon view, that, they're both high water users, relatively speaking. The San Quentin one, San Quentin's our largest water user, is an interesting one. So I think that the idea of a kind of a dynamic list, that we strike certain things, go and get them off the list so that they're done without having to keep looking at 12 or 15 alternatives, is interesting, especially in light of Ben's comment that we have a certain capacity built in, bonding payment capacity. If you want to look at it.
So we'll incorporate that as we bring back one consideration as we look at Peacock Gap is our capitalization, our bonding capacity, and that sort of stuff. So it is, in the $7,000 range, relatively attractive in the scope of what we're looking at. At the same time, it's $20 million for 280 or so acre feet. So it takes a bite out of our capacity. So I do think we want to think about it in context of the bigger program, but absolutely pursue and look for grant and maybe private funding as well to bring that down.
I was taught, and you probably heard me say this before, that you take little steps for little feet. And I think that's the key here, is bite size.
Right. And that's what the board really has done so far, right? We spun off the what do we call it? The release system, automating the releases, right? We didn't burden this process with that. We spun off the Nicasio Spillway project to move forward. Of course, conservation. So we've tried to do that. And I appreciate the interest, and we'll look for those opportunities to continue.
Great. I'd like to say one more thing too. It's still good that we've done it. And knowing the alternatives exist, even if they're very pricey, is good information, valuable to the long-term management of the district, because, this is a piece of the pie. There's still going to be pie left to deal with down the road. So I think this is a great. And Director Russell, I really concur with that line of thinking that this is a continuum. And Paul Sellier mentioned adaptive management. I mean, I have to imagine we'll be looking at as we select a preferred project or projects, also thinking about continuing to pursue and understand these other projects, and as technology advances and as we monitor the extent, pace of climate change and the impacts as we continue to better understand our demand, right? This is really a risk adaptive management exercise, I think. And you can only imagine the issues if you're dealing with growth like Contra Costa County or Petaluma, even Sonoma County, where you don't have the luxury of just saying, well, deal with it down the road. You know, it has to be dealt with in the next year, next 5 years. It's got to be ready to go. And obviously puts a much bigger constraint of timing onto these things.
It would be nice to think about some of these projects as just what we do immediately versus what we do down the road. I think we need to think about a permanent solution to our water problem, and we may be at a place where we have a 10-year drought. So I think it would be nice to figure out what we want to do, what we want to continue to pursue as a longer term solution, but a more permanent solution.
Okay. With that, we'll go ahead and move to public comment. I'd like to first acknowledge all of the participation from the public tonight who's come to speak. So we appreciate you coming and sharing your opinion. Terry, do we have a count on the number of speakers?
I have 11 in person and 1 online so far.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
they're
We'll go
coming.
ahead and keep the 3 minutes, and we'll go ahead and take public comment.
The first 3 speakers, Carol Dulcini, Phil Sauter, and Sam Dulcini.
I won't take the full 3 minutes. Good evening, board members and staff, and welcome to new Director Mayer. My name is Carol Dulcini, and I am part of the Hicks Valley community that lives and works on the ranches that border the Sulihuli Reservoir. There are a number of us here tonight who oppose Marin Water's reservoir expansion plans in West Marin. I'd like to take a moment and ask those of you who are here to support our efforts and save Hicks Valley and West Marin, please raise your hand. I think there's another 15 or so in the breakout room, and I think we've got another 20 on Zoom who aren't speaking, but who are supporting us. Thank you for helping us amplify our message so it can be better heard. Tonight, you will hear from speakers from the broader community. Our message is twofold. Number 1, we oppose the expansion of Sulihuli, and 2, we support those projects that, as we have just seen in this presentation, will achieve Marin's water supply targets without destroying valuable agricultural land and without placing undue financial pressure on Marin ratepayers. Our hope tonight is that we will all come to agree that we have reached the end of the road for the Sulihuli expansion option on the water supply roadmap. It's time to fine-tune the portfolio to include options that are both feasible and affordable. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil Sauter, then Sam Dulcini, please.
Thanks for the presentation. I noticed that water efficiency is listed at the top of the short-term projects, but other than AMI, it's not listed as a long-term project. It also delivers at most at a cost of $2.3 million, 200,000 acre-feet annually. That's equivalent to 200,000 gallons a day, or about a gallon per capita per day. That's such a small number that it would get lost in rounding error. Finally, if our stated goal is conservation savings of 4 million gallons a day by 2045, there's no defined path to get that 20-fold increase. I'd suggest bringing water efficiency back when we have a plan with a measurable impact. I think it's also important to remember that Marin Water's century-old mission is to provide high-quality drinking water to its customers. Somewhere along the way, we also got into the landscape irrigation business, which now accounts for about half our potable water supply. From time to time, depending on rainfall, we get out of this business, causing major disruptions to those relatively few customers who rely on potable water to keep their lawns green. They're the reason we're out looking for expensive and often lower quality new water supplies. They're the reason we're considering desal, which has already been voted down. They're the reason we're looking at flooding private property and losing generational homes and businesses. And they're the reason we're considering lowering the quality of our drinking water from outside sources and increasing the treatment level so that we can continue providing potable water for outdoor use. It's worth noting that running landscaping water through our potable distribution system also increases the wear and tear on our pipes, our pumps, and our storage tanks, all of which are begging for maintenance. These are costs beyond the financial costs outlined today, and they affect the large majority of the district's customers, while the benefits affect relatively few district customers. That's why I think it's important that we understand how many irrigation users there are, where they are, how much potable water they're using outdoors, and how necessary it is to provide potable water for landscaping. If we want a useful cost-benefit analysis, we need to define all the costs and acknowledge that all customers pay them. And we need to understand just how many or how few customers reach the benefits. Last week, I noticed that Robert Redford is selling his Tiburon home, and he and his wife both commented proudly on their water-saving landscape and felt that it added value to their $4.2 million home. Before they move, I'd love to see them featured in our public communications, and perhaps they'd agree to host a tour for their neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. After Mr. Dulcini is Sally Gale and then Bronte Edwards.
Good evening, Board. Sam Dulcini. I appreciate the opportunity to address you here today. I am also an elected official, so I know the feelings that come with lots of people at public comment time. I have over 25 years on the Marin County Farm Bureau Board of Directors, 18 years with the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, nearly 10 decades of family institutional knowledge in Marin County, but I'm always willing to learn, and I learned something interesting here this evening. I thought farmers were the only ones that spent this much time talking about the weather. Two observations I'd like to share. Well, one, here in opposition to anything that would impact the precious, valuable agricultural lands of Marin County, especially those the taxpayers have invested money through the Marin Agricultural Land Trust to permanently protected. Secondly, can't help but realize that the conveyance and storage ideas all depend on rain falling within a 100-mile envelope between here and Lake Mendocino. Also, we have the big question mark about the Potter Valley project and how much water will be coming through from the Eel River into the Russian River, and a neighbor to the north who is expanding, which brings to the question, how reliable will Sonoma County water be long-term? Prefer ideas, as was mentioned earlier, possibilities also of long-term droughts, where I see ideas like desal. We know the San Francisco Bay is not going anywhere, as being a good option, or looking again at putting the pipeline back across the Richmond Santa Fe like we had in the 70s, especially now that if we are tied into a statewide interstate system, a statewide electrical grid, why are not we also tied into a statewide water system, which now includes Los Vaqueros, that was not there in the 70s, Sites Reservoir that will be built, and an expanded San Luis Reservoir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I am Sally Gale, a rancher from Chileno Valley and the board chair of the Marin Resource Conservation District. I am speaking as a member of the community tonight. This evening, you have heard many good arguments against raising Suluhuli to increase water storage, protection of sensitive habitat, the high cost of paying off ranchers, the loss of productive ag land, and the high cost of moving water. All these are good arguments. I would like to present a different idea. I would like to ask whether destroying these ranches and submerging pasture land is the right thing to do. Is it right? MMWD owns Kent Lake and its surrounding hills. I am wondering why it is not an obvious choice for the district to raise Kent Lake. If you have land which you can use for the purpose, why do you look at someone else's land and decide to build there? Does it not seem logical to use your own land, especially since the cost is the same, as we heard tonight? If I wanted to build a dam on my neighbor's ranch because it was cheaper or I liked it better, would that be right? I know you will say that it is for the public good and therefore supersedes the needs of the landowners. But is that not what the public is? A large number of landowners and users? Does might make right? Just because you can, should you? I feel that eminent domain is a serious step to take and must be hugely justified to be taken. In this case, where you have other good options, where you can get what you want and need by not upsetting a whole community, where you can avoid drowning several beautiful and well-loved historic ranches, why would you not site your storage elsewhere and do the right and fair thing? I speak against raising Suluhuli in the name of what is just and fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Bronte Edwards, Annie Dulcini Mont, and Alex DeCarly.
All right. Good evening. My name is Bronte Edwards. I'm a chef and first-generation sheep rancher, born and raised here in the North Bay. I'm here tonight to ask this board to reject the expansion of the Suluhuli and the Upper Nicasio reservoirs. According to the USDA, the United States loses 1.8 million acres of farmland every year. We cannot afford to lose any more agricultural lands. We see a larger anti-agriculture movement happening around the country, and whether it was intended or not, these proposed projects are an attack on our local food equity, food sovereignty, and our open space lands. In the agricultural community here in the North Bay, we take pride that we are leaders in the regenerative farming movement nationwide. You have name brands like Strauss Family Creamery, the first organic creamery in the nation. You have ranches like Stemple Creek Ranch that have been instrumental in studies done by the Marin Carbon Project that have shown groundbreaking data that grazing reverses climate change. We have world-class restaurants like Chez Panisse serving our food that we grow in Marin County for their restaurant. Removal of these farmlands can and will negatively impact the entire Bay Area as a whole. Neighboring Sonoma County just survived the greatest legislative attack on local agriculture and local food systems in the history of our region. That was met with an overwhelming community response and support for local agriculture. 85% of residents voted to protect local farms and local food. Our Bay Area culture demands commitment to innovation and long-term sustainability. Unfortunately, these projects do not reflect that. Upon further research into these proposals, one thing has become clear, that this body has an opportunity to meet the status quo of neighboring counties by integrating long-term solutions such as new pipelines and more robust recycled water infrastructure. I think I speak for the majority of the community members when I say that we're not interested in the expansion of water storage that irreversibly removes agricultural lands from production for water that you all have made clear is not safe to eat the fish that swim in that water. It's hard to rationalize such a large sacrifice for water that frankly is poor quality. These two options do not align with our local culture or sustainability goals, and they appear to be a Band-Aid for a larger issue, which is mismanagement of local resources and short-term solutions justified by a price tag, which we have shown tonight does not even work anyways. In addition, as a young agriculturalist in this community, I feel it is not equitable to punish rural families with century-plus legacies because of the lack of commitment to sustainability and responsible management of our resources. If farmland is so easily disposable, it makes me concerned for other first-generation farmers like myself and our ability to succeed when local leaders show through their actions that they neither support nor value the agriculture community and the continuation of the legacy of all of us being leaders in regenerative agriculture in America. I
Thank you for
encourage
your
you all to
comments.
do more. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie Dulcini Mont, Alex DeCarli, and then Shalina Moretta.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for taking my comment. My name is Annie Dalcini Mount, and I am a community member speaking on opposition in expanding the Sulahuli Reservoir. I understand there are drought concerns, and I appreciate the board's forward thinking about preventing water shortage for the residents of Marin. What we need to keep in mind is the impact of this project would have on our community and how MMWD can achieve the same goal by creating enough water storage and not impacting the residents of Marin and the environment in a negative way. Here are some important examples to consider. Water conservation. Studies are showing that over 40% of the water in Marin County is used for landscaping. This information should send off red flags everywhere and trigger MMWD to impose a conservation effort throughout the county. This will remind people how valuable our water is and that's something not to be taken for granted. If we all did our part to conserve, the effects could be monumental. Displacing endangered species. Multiple endangered species, such as different plants, birds, and frogs, live within the Hicks Valley area, and destroying their natural habitats can be destructive. We need to nurture our environments by leaving them untouched, which will allow the endangered species to live and to thrive. The cost alone for the environmentalists to research this impact, including all sorts of permitting and mitigation, can be astronomical. Costs of hauling in generators. Due to the unreliable electricity in the Hicks Valley area, electric generators are not feasible to pump the water and to supply to the Marin County residents. Therefore, large diesel generators will have to be hauled in, which will be very expensive and have a negative impact on the environment. And trucking the generators back and forth, as well as running them at the dam, will leave a huge carbon footprint. Reduction in local food supply. Without our rural lands, we will have no space to grow our own food. Raising animals for meat, eggs, and as well as growing vegetables is an important part of any community, and most especially in Marin. People in this area travel far and wide to attend the Marin County Farmers Market, and it's only about 30 minutes away from Hicks Valley. Not only are these customers in our own community, but they're also friends that are local chefs traveling from San Francisco to get the best ingredients for the restaurants. So my final thoughts. Do you understand the negative impact that this will cause environmentally with endangered species and with your carbon footprint? Do you understand that moving forward with this project has significantly higher costs than you're anticipating? And do you understand how this will be a negative impact that you will cause among community members and beyond?
Thank you. Miss Alex DeCarli, please, and then Shalina Moretta.
I'd like to withdraw my speaker. And I don't know if I can pass my time to somebody else.
No, we don't pass times. Okay, so Shalina Moretta. And then Bob Middlestead and Larry Minikis.
Hi, my name is Shalina Moretta. Thanks for hearing the community who you represent. I've heard the arguments for needing to expand in case of drought. My question is why on earth it would be drowning farmers and local food even be considered? What's the real goal here? You have other viable options that will achieve goals of resilience and reliability. It needs to be driven home that flooding out farms and compromising local food supply should never be the first option. This is appalling to me, and would be to the rest of the public as well if they knew that you're considering drowning regenerative style farms and local food supply over all these other options. You're a group that was elected to protect the local people and make good decisions for the people. You're going against what people in this community literally vote with their dollars for. Open space easements are something people donate to. Farmers markets are more frequented in Marin and Sonoma counties than nearly anywhere else in the United States. We just made a very clear stand in Sonoma County on Measure J that local food is important. And we have voted for Measure A here in Marin County to pay to protect open space and ag land, voting with our dollars. Why haven't you listened to how important that is? All the while knowing you already own a place that is perfectly viable for increasing water storage. Why aren't you looking to your own property first, rather than taking someone else's? Aren't we taught this in kindergarten? Play with your own toys, Roger. Someone else always looks more enticing, but it's not yours. So why is it happening? Is the goal to increase the toys you have at your disposal? What happens to these farms? Do you honestly think they'll relocate? That doesn't happen. Farms take more infrastructure than almost any other businesses on earth. Read Land Rich, Cash Poor if you aren't educated on it. Farms can't just relocate the animals, and farmers who lose their land face mental health that would cripple the strongest of us humans. They can't just pack up and move everything to somewhere they don't have a connection with. Processes like what's going on here are emotionally excruciating, infuriating, and mentally taxing for the folks being attacked. And it takes time away from farmers who already have tight margins for being sustainable in an area like this. Do you recognize how hard it is to be a farmer in a place like Marin County? They do it because this is what their ancestors believed in and worked their tails off for. Ancestors who took boats away from their homeland to scrounge together pennies to buy a plot of land to build what we know of as Marin. Do you know their stories? Do you know the blood, sweat, and sacrifice their families made to this community to make it what we know of it as today? This is not what the public wants, and we don't stand for it. These are our own. With less than 2% of the population being farmers, why are we constantly trying to squash the endangered in our own species? These farmers are not just fighting for their job, they're fighting for our cultural heritage. Agriculture is a finite resource. It's important to our
Thank you.
survival. This is solving drought
Okay,
by
thank you,
creating
Ms. Moretta. I
famine.
have another person. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bob Middlestat and Larry Menikis, please.
Good evening. I don't know what the right answer is, long-term or short-term, but I don't think there's enough reason to take anything off the table tonight. My family has a farming background. I understand the emotional attachment to farms. But I think I'm, so far at least, the only ratepayer talking tonight. I'm the only person who depends on Marin Water for my water. I'd like to just put some of this in perspective if I can. As I understand it, there's almost 200,000 people who depend on Marin Water for water. As I understand it, there are about 70 people who would be affected by expanding Suluhuli. If you ask me, the desires of 70, no matter how eloquent, no matter how heartfelt, no matter how often repeated, should not be allowed to overwhelm the needs of 200,000 people. The available farmland in Marin is about 170,000 acres. Here, I understand the dam expansion will affect about 500 acres. That's 0.3%. There are more than 13,000 head of cattle in Marin. From what I can tell, the main cattle farm in this area has only about 60 head. Not to put too fine a point on it, but from what I have seen, it's quite the overstatement to say that this project, if it were to go forward, will devastate Marin farming and all the other hyperbole we've heard about. One final point, if I may, on the cost and what the right solution is. I don't think anybody's in a position, based on what we've seen so far, to make this decision. But I don't think we know enough, especially without knowing the availability of grants and other funding, to say that anything is clearly out of reach and should be taken off the table. The example of Tam Union High School District, if they had just sat there and said, all of this is too expensive, they never would have got the bond passed. I suggest that we start with what is needed. Figure out, and I think people are doing this. What is needed? What do we need to avoid a repeat of 2021? We don't want to run out of money. We don't want to run out of water. That's the most important thing. So what do we need to get that done? And then to figure out a way to see if we can afford it. But put that cart before that horse, and let's see what we need. Then let's figure out how we can afford it, what grants are available, and what the best way to do. Leadership, I suggest, is doing it that way. What do the people need? And then we'll figure out a way to see if we can afford it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. After Larry Minikis is David Lewis and James Ely.
Good evening, Larry Minikis, Marin Conservation League. My comments and what Director Smith had to say earlier and what Director Russell said a couple of months ago about why are we even looking at the dam raise? We're not going to be able to afford this, is in line with what I want to say here. Certainly, we should be looking at these short-term projects as the low-hanging fruit. That's 4,000 to 6,400 acre feet. That's not insignificant. That's meaningful. We should definitely be looking at the conveyance. That is our best option. And we should be looking at a deeper partnership with Sonoma Water and Sonoma County in general. And I think those are our best options going forward. But there's also a story here. And the story is around Suluhuli and how this process is unfolded. Back in 2021, October 15th, the board retreat, the quote for Suluhuli to raise it 48 feet was between $100 and $150 million for 20,000 acre feet. In July 22nd, we had another estimate, and that's 148 million for a 48 foot dam raise. But then we come to April 24, and the estimate is 291 million. Okay, that's double in 2 years is what we came up with. But then we now come to today, and we've gone from 20,000 acre feet, and we've dropped that to 5,000 acre feet in just a few months. Am I incorrect there? Because the number showed 5,000. Well, it's 20,000 acre feet. My point being that we're looking at about a 500% increase in cost over the original estimates. And the story here is when we're doing large infrastructure projects like we are, I have cautioned the board repeatedly to take your time, to not feel public pressure is more important than getting this right. And getting this right is really important. I don't even know we can believe the $481 million figure at this point. And if I was a betting person, I'd take a bet on that number as well. Suluhuli should just be off the table. These people should be able to go home and relax. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, directors, staff. My name's David Lewis. I'm the Director and Watershed Management Advisor for UC Cooperative Extension Marin. And I want to thank you for this opportunity. Also, as I begin, I want to share my appreciation for what you're doing in terms of doing this roadmap, building back resiliency into our water system for all of Marin and all of us that live and work here. Early this year, 4th District Supervisor Rodoni asked myself and Agricultural Commissioner Joe Davini to do an analysis of the impacts to agriculture of the Suluhuli raise and the Upper Nicasio project. I want to thank General Manager for sharing that analysis with you. And I'm here today just to elevate that analysis so it's there in the room for you as you deliberate the options and come to your decisions. The two proposed storage projects present risks of decreased production and viability, if not full closure of multiple family farms. The respective projects' areas of inundation are 500 in one case, and we don't yet know the inundation in the other, but it has far-reaching ripple effects. I think what I've provided for you in that analysis is the end result is that more than 9,300 acres will be impacted by the Suluhuli raise, and somewhere over 4,000 for the Upper Nicasio project. Those numbers come from the fact that you have acreage of inundation, but then you have immediately contiguous ranches that lose roads, that lose homes, that lose infrastructure, that become inoperable themselves. And then those ranches themselves are part of hubs or connected to other farms and ranches. So there's a ripple effect, and pun intended. I'll just simply say I want to again, on behalf of myself and Agricultural Commissioner Davini, we continue to be a resource. We are continually grateful, as we were in the last extreme dry period, for the way Marin Water was a leader with other partners in helping to bring water to ranches in really severe need, the availability of water and being able to truck water out in severe need. We hope that in bringing this kind of complementary information, we can then be at the table with you and explore options that as you pursue the next couple of meetings and look at all of the options that staff will be bringing to you and the metrics you'll use to make those decisions, you'll seriously weigh the importance of Marin's agricultural land. The land that would be inundated is locally significant. It's land that would be absolutely the kind of land that state agencies on through to land trusts preserve and conserve. So I hope you'll prioritize that as much as you do the other aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. James Ely, and then I'm moving on to the Zoom, Diane Moore and 1402.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I am a retired actuary, and I just want to comment on what I saw in terms of the description of the strategic water supply assessment, and and the comments and questions that were asked and made about it. It seems that it's highly deterministic in nature, and we were given, and based on a number of point estimates, 1 year and 3. This kind of reflects the state of the art of actuaries 20 years ago. And today, especially when you get involved with anything involving weather, there is far more sophisticated modeling going on. There are new startup flood modeling firms in the East Bay and in San Francisco that could do distributional estimates, and not only of what is the overall frequency, but what is the likelihood of a catastrophic drought occurring within the next 10 years or 20 years. And there are timelines associated with or time lags associated with construction projects. So you need to know both the immediate impact and the likelihood of exceedance of your estimate. So it's a very dynamic financial analysis that needs to be done. These are large amounts of money that you're talking about. And I don't mean to be critical, because I think this is probably typical of the state of standard practice for most capital budgeting. But when you get involved in something that's weather related, science, whether it's at the UC or consultants available in the Bay Area, are capable of doing far more sophisticated work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Diane Moore, then 1402. Go ahead, Ms. Moore.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. I'm Diane Moore. I'm the owner and principal biologist of Moore Biological Consultants, and I have 30 years of experience in environmental consulting focused on wetlands, endangered species, and permitting. I got my bachelor's at UC Berkeley in conservation and resource studies, focus on wildlife biology, and my master's at UC Davis in ecology. I was hired by the Dulcini Family Council to study the biology impacts of raising Sulahuili Dam. I conducted a field survey to the reservoir on August 26th with Elaine Dulcini. I also reviewed documents and maps, searched databases, studied aerial photographs and length, and prepared a report. I hope some of you had a chance to read my report. It contains a lot of interesting information. In summary, the reservoir is a biological gem. It's a birder's heaven, provides habitat for several threatened and endangered species, and provides habitat for a huge number of resident and migratory birds. 142 species of birds have been documented at the reservoir during the Audubon bird count. I've never worked on a project with biology impacts even half as great as raising the Sulahuili Dam. The project will be very, very challenging and maybe not possible to get through the environmental review and permitting processes. It may not be feasible. And raising the dam appears very, very costly with respect to environmental mitigation, which I think needs to be looked at more closely. The reservoir would increase in size by over 500 acres, and because many of the creeks draining into the reservoir meander through gentle valleys, just a few feet of elevation on the dam would flood hundreds of acres of land. Over 6 miles of big creeks would be inundated with substantial wetland acreages along them. And I've estimated, as I describe in my letter report to you, that over I'm estimating $150 million price tag just on wetland mitigation. In contrast, there are no broad valleys with extensive wetlands and creeks flowing into Kent Reservoir. And the wetland mitigation cost could be a lot larger. It would need to be studied by doing a wetland delineation. But waters and wetlands are not all. I saw a bald eagle at the reservoir. They likely nest there. Golden eagles have been documented there for years and also likely nest there. Spotted owl, threatened species, nests very close to the dam and has been for decades and been documented elsewhere in the lake. And all of these birds could be impacted by construction. I saw northwestern pond turtles, a proposed threatened species, during my field visit. I also heard and saw frogs jumping into the water that were likely red-legged frogs, as the area is in designated critical habitat for this species. There's a very rare plant there, one of only 5 known occurrences of this species right along the shoreline, called Baker's Larkspur, that would be impacted. And a huge amount of effort would need to be done to study the biology to actually estimate the cost.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Next speaker is 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. You've heard from one particular community, but please keep in mind, board members, that your charge will be to determine the greatest good for the greatest number consistent with available resources. With regard to conveyancing, a key issue is reliability. If you look to anyone else, the one thing you may be sure is if things get very difficult and things get very dry, the interests of Marin County consumers will be subordinated to the interest of Sonoma County consumers, contracts notwithstanding. And finally, with regard to conservation, please recall the words of your consultant who said, "The sponge has been squeezed already." Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Ed Jamison. Go ahead, sir. Mr. Ed Jamison, please. I've unmuted you.
Thank you. You can hear me.
Yes.
We need about 15 to 17,000 acre feet per year of supplemental drought supply. As for Jacob's estimate that we need only 8,500 acre feet per year, that analysis was riddled with errors and should be ignored. Past district estimates have been in the 12 to 18,000 acre foot range. Correctly sizing the drought need is overwhelmingly the most important issue in this whole subject. Our bonding capacity severely limits our feasible alternatives. Reflecting evaporation, raising a dam 20,000 acre feet may add about 4,000 acre feet per year, not 5,000 for a 4-year drought supply, providing only about 1/4 of what we need at a cost of around $500 to $700 million. Raising a reservoir is not a financially feasible alternative. Slide number 3 shows raising the Nicasio spillway would add 3,000 acre feet to storage, but net of evaporation, that would only add about 600 acre feet per year, not 1,000. So the potential maximum total annual supply of the options shown on slide 3 would be about 4,000 acre feet per year, not 6,400. I believe the likely outcome is in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 acre feet per year. The estimated $352 million cost of a 5-MG desal plant appears to be way out of line with costs elsewhere in California. $175 million at Tahini, including extra costs for full salinity ocean water, and $110 million for a 20% larger plant at Antioch. I believe we need to get updated desal cost estimates from 2 other engineering consultants, perhaps the ones working on Antioch and Tahini. The largest winter water supply alternative, Cotati 3 at $372 million, would give us 8,100 acre feet per year, about half of what we need. Add in a necessary supplement from desal, and the total cost would be well above $700 million, far above our bonding capacity. Desal alone could meet all of our needs, likely at a cost in the ballpark of our bonding capacity. I'm not sure tonight's new baseline 100-year life costing assumption is the right way to look at this. It significantly reduces the acre foot costs of 100-year assets like reservoir raises and winter water pipeline. But ratepayers will have to pay all 100 years of that value over the next 30 years, the life of the bonds. Tonight's 100-year lifetime assumption for the supply alternative significantly understates the cost of reservoir raises and winter water to ratepayers over the next 30 years and should perhaps be reconsidered. It has turned on its head the cost analyses presented in recent months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I have no further speakers.
Great, thank you very much. Excuse
Oh,
me.
I'm sorry. One more person did raise their hand. I apologize. Trish Dairy. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kathy Tresh. I first of all wanted to say we have a dairy in Sonoma County. We're on Stemple Creek. Stemple Creek runs partway in Sonoma County and partway into Marin County. In 1994, Pernusky Chatham did a watershed survey in Stemple Creek, and at that time there were 32 dairies. Now there are 11. So agriculture is really under the gun in Sonoma and Marin. We just defeated Measure J. Our family farm was one of the ones that would have been banned under Measure J, even though our cows have 2,500 acres to graze on. But I'm here to share a little bit of insight because I went through, was a farm that was part of a dam project back in the 90s. When Santa Rosa needed to build a dam to store their wastewater, they looked at our farm and a farm owned by UC, which was contiguous to us. That dam would have been about 15,000 acre feet, which I think Lake Nicasio is pretty close to a little over 25,000 acre feet. So this was a big dam project. And so we spent about 5 years of our lives fighting that project. And we went through the first EIR. They selected our project. And this is some information that may be of interest to you. They started eminent domain proceedings on us. And what we learned by getting a lawyer was that they would have to pay us fair market value. But when that is over, we would go back to court and we would sue them for the loss of our business and relocation. And so it's very much more expensive than just the land cost of losing a farm. And so then we went after the EIR and we got the EIR decertified because they really hadn't done a good job on the biological wealth and the stream that was Stemple Creek. So I think you really need to prioritize protecting farmland. These farmers are sequestering carbon. They're providing food for you. There's a huge biological richness and wealth that is part of these farms. And plus, displacing these families, like the consultants go home and they get a good night's sleep, and these families won't get a good night's sleep if they are continually under the gun. And just having this on the table is so much attrition for them, and it's really difficult. So I think I would really implore you to prioritize farmland. And as you go through your process, good luck to you all. And I know you'll do the right things. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay. Again, thank you for the public for your participation tonight, and also too for the members of the public who are investing resources to try to provide more information to the board as it comes up. We appreciate the effort, but we have to make sure that we're following the proper procedure to disseminate that information, but do understand it will be taken at some point under advisement. So thank you very much. And with that, Terry, move on to the next item. That will be upcoming board meetings.
Yes, good evening. Next, I'm sorry, tentatively, I have the closed session for this Friday, depending upon tonight's closed session. And then also next week, we have the final meetings of the year. We'll have the Board of Directors regular monthly meeting on the 17th, the Watershed Committee meeting on Thursday, and the Operations Committee meeting on Friday.
Great, thank you very much.
And one more, I believe the Tamales Bay Foundation has a meeting on Wednesday, the 18th.
Great, thank you very much. And then do we have any public comments on closed session?
There are none.
Okay, we'll go ahead and
Sorry, yes, of course, when I say that, yes, we do have one, 1402. 1402, please.
James Holmes, Larkspur. My question, has the district compared the estimated cost of defending this case with the estimated cost of doing the studies that the plaintiffs want? If you haven't done this cost comparison, please do so. If you have done it and have found that the studies would likely cost less than defense, then please do the studies. You authorized $200,000 for defense. Would the studies really cost more than that? Surely estimating the cost of studies is easier than the open-ended cost of litigation. I hope you're not just defending this case to vindicate your decision to skip the studies. And if the estimated cost of the studies is less than the cost of defense, I really hope you wouldn't defend the case anyway if you feared the studies' results would be unfavorable to the project. That would be beyond cynical. Please look at this matter objectively and economically. And finally, please remember that spending big bucks to defend this debatable and definitely non-essential pilot project is almost a slap in the face to ratepayers struggling with massive rate increases that the district told us were needed for essential purposes, not non-essential pilot projects. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more speaker, Bob Middlestat.
I just want to add one factual comment to the extent it's relevant at all to the deliberations you're going to undertake. But I was remiss in not welcoming the new director. Welcome. And that is this. The court's decision relied heavily on the absence of any evidence that on whether or not there would be increased usage of e-bikes on the fire roads. And the implication was that if the board found that there's no anticipated increased use of e-bikes on the fire roads compared to the existing use, whether lawful or unlawful, then the district would be entitled to an exemption from CEQA. I have been e-biking for 10 years. I am the head of an organization, E-Bike Access, that some of you know. I know the e-biking community, and I am as confident of this as I am of anything, and that is there is nobody sitting at home with an e-bike saying, I really want to be riding up on TAM, but I'm going to wait for the water district to officially approve it. Most people don't know one way or another, what the official policy is. So I can say with utter confidence that there will not be any material increase use of e-bikes on the fire roads if you look at the fire roads separate and consider that a separate issue. That's what I wanted to offer. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn to closed session. Okay, great. We're reconvening back to open session after closed session with no reportable action. With that, we'll go ahead and join the meeting for Tuesday, the 10th.